My Lords, there are three routes by which victims of child grooming may be awarded compensation. First, following a criminal conviction, a court can order compensation to be paid to the victim, but the criminal courts cannot embark on a detailed inquiry as to the extent of any injury, loss or damage. Second, victims can bring an action for damages for personal injury in the civil courts. This government is abolishing the 3-year limitation period so that it no longer operates as a barrier to compensation for such victims. And finally, victims can apply to the Criminal Injuries Compensation Scheme. These awards are assessed on a case-by-case basis, and the majority are decided within 12 months.
While thanking the noble lady, the Minister, for that very helpful reply and for our earlier meeting, might I request a further meeting? Because these young ladies, who may not all have the strength of Madame Pellicot, will still be living in a highly corrupted community in terms of their the activities that were perpetrated upon them earlier. Some of them may not be relevant for an award, but nonetheless the entire community does not seem to be honouring British law with regard to respect for women and young women and children. Would the Minister be willing to have a meeting not discussing the award, but to the wider implications, which perhaps we might manage to do something to help?
It's always a pleasure to speak to the noble lady, the Baroness, and the answer is yes.
Would the government set up a unit to start assessing the numbers of the victims of the grooming gangs, and in particular their distribution and their personal situation, and then start learning from the problems of the previous schemes, such as the Post Office Horizon and the infected blood schemes, so that when the inquiry is complete, the victims don't have to wait for years for their compensation?
As the noble lady, Baroness Walmsley, knows, it is a top priority for the government to appoint the chair of the National Inquiry as quickly as possible, and we're grateful to Baroness Casey for supporting these efforts. Once the chair is in place, the terms of reference to the inquiry will be settled, and we'll take it from there.
Lords, we did discuss criminal exploitation of children in the debate last night. In my experience, a young woman was denied any compensation because of the way the trial was conducted, and she was in the position where, when the third barrister had been appointed by a particular defendant, she was told she had to go through her third cross-examination. She went out that night and did things she shouldn't have. She got drunk. She maybe had other substances, I don't know. But she ended up in the police station overnight. And then any compensation was denied her. We are in the position with these young women being extremely vulnerable, and actually the way we operate our court system re-traumatises them in many ways. And I hope that the government, in thinking about the compensation, takes these issues into account.
The noble lady raises a number of points in that question. If I may, many of those will be for the National Inquiry to deal with. I'll simply deal very quickly, if I may, with the question of convictions and the effect of that on compensation. It is right to say that it is a condition of applying to the Criminal Injuries Compensation Scheme that the applicant does not have unspent criminal convictions. The difficulty with waiving that for one group is that it undermines the universality of the system. We are very anxious not to create a hierarchy of victims where some are seen as more worthy of belief or compensation than others, and we'll do everything we can to avoid that.
My Lords, it has been widely reported that 4 victims of the grooming scandal have resigned from the liaison panel of the National Grooming Gangs Inquiry, describing a toxic, fearful environment and accusing the process of being manipulated away from the central issue of the grooming gangs. Will the noble lady, the Minister, commit to publishing a proper timeline, including a fixed timescale for the appointment of a chair and a clear start date for this important inquiry?
The government was extremely saddened by the resignation of those victims, and they're always welcome to rejoin and re-engage with the process. We very much hope that they will. The process of appointing the chair is well underway. As I've already said, Baroness Casey is assisting with this. It wouldn't be helpful to give a running commentary on what's happening, but it is really important to the government to get on with this.
Could I ask the Noble Baroness, the Minister... Sorry. Okay.
Grateful. My Lords, the Minister mentioned 3 possible avenues for compensation. I think she would accept that the largest award is likely to be if there is a civil claim rather than the other 2 avenues. Can she help the House with who the potential defendants in such a claim might be? I'm not asking for her legal advice, but some general guidance if this is to be a realistic remedy.
Well, of course, we're speaking generically about victims of grooming, but they may fall into a number of different categories. There are the grooming gangs, about which a great deal has been heard, but there are, for example, also victims of online grooming. So I can't really give an answer as to who the potential defendant is going to be that will actually deal with all the victims. It's a case-by-case decision to be made.
Could I ask the Noble Baroness, the Minister, if the government has consulted the independent public advocate about the new inquiry? Because as the voice of victims and survivors within the system, and as the system threatens to overwhelm them yet again, wouldn't her guidance and support for this group be really valuable in this instance?
I thank the Noble Lady for her question, and I recognise, of course, her ongoing interest in the question of the independent public advocate, which is very welcome. I don't know the answer. Can I write to you?
Will the Noble Lady join me in congratulating Baroness Nicholson on the wording of her question, which for once does not put the word Pakistani in front of child grooming scandals. Will the Noble Lady agree that the problem isn't to be laid at the door of our Pakistani men, but very largely of our Muslim men, and therefore the problem is religious, not ethnic?
I'm afraid I am absolutely not going to agree with that. It's going to be a matter for the new national inquiry, and I'm not going to preempt that.
My noble friend Baroness Walmsley's question, she didn't necessarily ask about the terms of reference of the inquiry. She asked about the mechanisms of the payments of the compensation scheme. So could I ask the noble lady, the Minister, have the government learned from what's happened in the infected blood and the Post Office Horizon scheme, and are they now working on the mechanisms of the compensation scheme so that fast payment will flow once the public inquiry has reached its conclusions?
The difficulty with that question is that it presupposes the existence of a compensation scheme for these victims. There is no such compensation scheme in existence. Whether or not that is something that is recommended by the National Inquiry, we will wait and see. As I've already said, there are a number of different categories of victims in these cases, and not all the same conditions apply to all of them. But I take the point that if there were to be a compensation scheme, it's important that it pays out quickly.
Given the question of Baroness Armstrong, surely a very specific compensation scheme would deal with those issues. And can I suggest to the Noble Lady, the Minister, that she looks at the scheme that we set up in Northern Ireland to deal with child institutional abuse, and the way in which that scheme worked meant that it was very quickly operated and that victims were able to access that scheme. And I think it's something that the National Inquiry could very much benefit from looking at.
I thank the Noble Lady very much for that, and obviously it's something that would be very useful to look into once the inquiry is set up.
My Lords,
it's the turn of the Democrat benches.
Thank you. My Lords, can I just ask the question around the fact that the perpetrators of these crimes are men from all backgrounds, but many of them are not from upstanding backgrounds in the sense of some of those are involved in criminal activities like drug dealing, etc. So what action is
His Majesty's Government wanting to take against those convicted, looking at the Proceeds of Crime Act, because some of these people, the reason they were able to groom some of these young ladies, women and girls was because they had flash cars, etc. And how do we actually ensure that those monsters have all the criminal assets from their ill-gotten gains taken away from them after conviction?
It's a very good point. Every judge at the end of a criminal trial has the ability to make a confiscation order, and they're being pursued with rigour because it's really important to ensure that criminals don't profit from that kind of illicit activity.